The CFO called me replaceable, while my corrected budget report was still glowing on the conference room screen. Conrad Wexler tapped the projector image with his pen, right where I had circled a $1.4 million forecasting error that nobody else had caught. Around the table, the finance team sat frozen. Nobody blinked too loudly. Nobody shifted in their chairs. Nobody wanted his attention to land on them next. "You see this?" Conrad said, smiling without any warmth. "This is what happens when analysts confuse checking numbers with understanding strategy." My throat tightened. I had found duplicate vendor accruals buried in the system, hidden overtime costs that accounting had missed, and a debt covenant risk that could have embarrassed us badly in front of the board. I had brought it to Conrad privately first. He ignored me. So I raised it in the budget review meeting because the numbers actually mattered. He leaned closer across the polished table. "This is why analysts need to remember their place. You're replaceable." Then he looked directly at HR. "Prepare her exit paperwork by Friday." My hand stayed folded in my lap, nails pressing small half-moons into my skin. My name is Paige Whitlow. And what Conrad did not know was that the legal folder in my bag proved I owned 72% of the company and had final say over the financial decision he was trying to force through. I did not cry until the stairwell door closed behind me. Even then, I only gave myself 10 seconds. 10 seconds to breathe through the burn spreading across my chest. 10 seconds to feel every pair of eyes from that conference room still stuck to my back. 10 seconds to hate how familiar humiliation felt when a powerful man said it calmly enough to sound professional and reasonable. Then I stopped. I straightened my spine. I opened my bag. Inside was a blue legal folder from my grandmother's estate attorney, ownership verification documents, trust agreements, voting rights documentation, final approval clause over major financial decisions. The company everyone thought belonged to executives and outside investors had actually been built on money my grandmother lent through a family trust decades ago. When the company failed to make repayment, equity converted automatically under the original terms. When she died 6 months ago, the trust passed directly to me. I pulled out my phone and called the board's legal counsel, Maribel Knox. "This is Paige Whitlow," I said. My voice was steady. "Conrad Wexler just threatened to terminate me after I questioned financial reports in front of the team. I need to know whether my ownership rights have been formally recognized by the current board." Maribel went quiet for a long moment. Then she said firmly, "Paige, do not sign anything they give you. I'm calling the board chair immediately." My grandmother, Winifred Whitlow, was not the kind of woman people imagined when they heard the words major investor. She wore cardigans with pearl buttons, clipped grocery coupons religiously, and kept every single receipt in envelopes labeled carefully by month. But when Whitlow and Vale's services almost collapsed 30 years ago, she funded the entire rescue operation, not as charity, as a secured trust investment with very clear terms. My grandfather had co-founded the company, but after he died unexpectedly, executives treated Grandma like a sentimental widow who should be grateful for holiday cards and small dividend checks. She was not sentimental about business. She was patient. The trust agreement stated clearly, if the company missed loan repayment and failed to cure the default within 90 days, her debt would convert automatically into controlling equity. The company missed repayment during an expansion crisis years later, then quietly stopped discussing the trust entirely. No clean buyout ever happened. No cancellation, no release of the debt, just silence. When her estate finally settled 6 months ago, my attorney found the conversion records buried deep in old corporate files. 72% controlling ownership. Final say over major debt decisions, sale negotiations, refinancing, and executive compensation. Conrad had called me replaceable in a company my grandmother had already saved once. And I was about to remind him of that fact. I took the financial analyst job under my own name because hiding my identity would have made the ownership claim look like some kind of trick. But I did not announce the trust either. My attorney had advised me carefully. Observe quietly, verify the company's current state, and avoid giving management a chance to bury records before the board could properly review everything. So I became Paige from reporting. The woman who brought soup in a thermos to her desk, The woman who corrected spreadsheet formulas without making people feel foolish about their mistakes. The woman Conrad routinely forgot was in the room unless he needed someone convenient to blame. At first, I genuinely thought the company had simply been careless about old ownership records. Then I started seeing clear patterns emerge. Vendor invoices approved twice under different cost centers. Expense categories shifted quietly before monthly financial close. Employee overtime costs reduced in reports, but not in actual payroll records. And one name kept appearing near all the adjustments. Miles Brennan, Conrad's favorite employee. Miles was charming, careless with important details, and completely protected. When his reports failed, someone else fixed them quietly. When they succeeded, Conrad called him future leadership material. The week I found the $1.4 million forecast error, I knew simple carelessness was no longer enough to explain what I was seeing. Something deliberate was happening. The refinancing presentation deck looked polished enough to hide the rot underneath. Conrad wanted the board to approve a new $40 million credit facility. On paper, it looked like responsible growth funding, equipment upgrades, software improvements, expansion into 3 new municipal service accounts. But the numbers underneath were too clean to be real. Vendor costs were significantly understated. Overtime reserves were dangerously low. Client penalty exposure was completely missing from the risk assessment section. Worst of all, the deck confidently stated that operating risk was minimal. I had spent 3 full weeks compiling internal reports showing exactly the opposite. When I brought the issues to Conrad privately in his office, he barely looked up from his computer screen. Page, Senior Finance handles capital strategy decisions. I said the board would be relying on those numbers to make their vote. His eyes lifted then. Not worried about accuracy, annoyed at being questioned. Do you always need to be the most careful person in every single room? I almost said yes. Instead, I revised the forecast properly and brought it to the full team review meeting. That was the meeting where he called me replaceable in front of everyone. Now I understood exactly why. The truth threatened his deal, and his bonus that came with it. Maribel sent the executive compensation packet to my attorney that same afternoon. Conrad would receive a substantial transaction bonus if the refinancing closed successfully before quarter end. Miles would receive a promotion to senior analyst and a special retention award. The CEO, August Val, would receive a significant debt restructuring incentive payment. I read through the numbers twice. Then I read them again, much slower. They were not stealing cash in some dramatic movie way with offshore accounts. It was cleaner and quieter than that. They were making the company look healthier than it actually was so they could close financing quickly, trigger performance bonuses tied to the deal, and leave future employees to live and work under tighter debt conditions afterward. My stomach turned. I thought about the night cleaning staff who had not received any raises in 2 years. The payroll coordinator who kept telling me overtime budgets were dangerously underfunded. The school district accounts that had started complaining about late maintenance response times. Conrad was not embarrassed by my correction because I had made him look wrong in front of people. He was furious because I had made him look wrong too early in the process. Before the bonus payment cleared, before the board vote happened, before the lie could harden into official approval, that changed everything about what came next. HR called it a separation conversation. I called it paperwork with a carefully hidden trap buried inside. The exit packet stated that my position was being eliminated due to departmental restructuring needs. That was strange, considering Conrad had publicly said I was being removed for insubordination and poor judgment. It offered 4 weeks of severance pay in exchange for a confidentiality agreement, release of all potential claims, and confirmation that I had not retained any company materials or documents. Then came the line that made my skin go cold. I acknowledge I have no ownership, investor, or governance interest in Whitlow and Vale Services. There it was, buried strategically under standard employment separation language. I looked directly at HR Director Fern Latham, who specifically added this clause to the template. She did not meet my eyes. Legal template language. I said, which legal template asks financial analysts to waive ownership interests they might potentially hold? Fern's fingers tightened visibly around her pen. Before she could answer, my phone buzzed loudly on the table. Text from Maribel. Board chair requests you join emergency finance session at 2 p.m. today. Bring all original documents. I slid the unsigned packet back across the desk. I won't be signing anything today. Fern's face went pale. Conrad came directly to my desk after HR reported that I had refused to sign. He did not shout or raise his voice. People like Conrad rarely shout when they think they still hold all the power. He leaned casually on the edge of my cubicle wall and said, "You are making this much harder than it needs to be, Paige." My coworkers suddenly became very interested in their computer screens. I said calmly, "I'm reviewing the documents carefully before signing." He smiled in that particular way that never reached his eyes. "You do understand that refusing a reasonable exit package affects future employment references." There it was. The quiet workplace threat. Not quite enough to sound illegal if someone overheard in a hallway. Just enough to make your rent payment flash before your eyes. I looked at his hand resting on my cubicle wall. His wedding ring tapped once against the metal trim. "I understand that written records affect much more than future references." His smile faded slightly. He asked what exactly I meant by that statement. I said, "You should plan to attend the board session this afternoon." For the first time since he had called me replaceable, Conrad looked genuinely uncertain. Not afraid yet, but getting close to it, his hand moved off my cubicle wall. The investor database recorded every single search automatically. Conrad apparently did not know that technical detail. At 11:42 a.m., he searched Paige Whitlow Trust. At 11:44, Winifred Whitlow Equity Conversion. At 11:46, 72% Control Rights Governance. At 11:52, he called Fern directly in HR. At 12:05, my building access badge was suddenly restricted. That was how I found out. My badge would no longer open the locked finance archive room door. I stood outside that door, looking at the red access light, and felt something settle deep inside me. Conrad had not fired me because he genuinely thought I was replaceable. He fired me because he had just realized I might not be replaceable at all. I called Maribel immediately from the hallway. She asked me calmly not to try the archive door again. "We'll handle all document access through legal counsel going forward." I smiled despite everything. For 6 months, Conrad had treated me like an inexperienced girl with spreadsheets and no real power. Now every system he trusted implicitly was quietly creating evidence against him. The search database, the badge access logs, the email timestamps, all of it building a permanent record he could not erase. The systems were working exactly as designed. They were just working for me now, instead of him. The boardroom smelled like polished wood and expensive coffee. Conrad sat at the far end of the long table, wearing the same calm expression he always used right before humiliating people publicly. August Val sat beside him, jaw visibly tight. Maribel sat across from them with my attorney, Simone Hart. The board chair, Everett Shaw, invited me to speak first. Conrad interrupted before I could even open my folder. "With all respect, this is an employment matter being dramatically exaggerated by a disgruntled analyst." Disgruntled. That word was corporate perfume sprayed liberally over fear. Simone placed the trust agreement on the polished table. "This is not an employment matter. This is a governance matter." Maribel displayed the ownership summary, clearly on the screen. Winifred Whitlow Trust Conversion. 72% controlling interest. Successor beneficiary Paige Whitlow, reserved rights. Final approval over major debt decisions and executive compensation actions. Conrad's expression did not change at all, but his hand stopped moving completely. That small detail was enough. I had spent 6 months watching him carefully. I knew exactly what his stillness meant. He had just understood how much trouble he was actually in. The room was very quiet. Everyone in the room was watching him now, waiting to see what he would say. Conrad said the trust conversion was historical, disputed, and operationally irrelevant. 3 specific words men use when they want a woman's paper rights to feel dusty and meaningless. Simone asked whether the company had ever issued a formal legal dispute notice. No. Had it repaid the trust loan? No. Had it canceled the converted equity? No. Had it notified the trustee that the conversion was considered invalid? No. Had it sent annual tax documents reflecting trust ownership to federal authorities? Maribel opened a thick folder. Yes. For 11 consecutive years. The room shifted perceptibly. Everett picked up one of the old tax schedules and stared at it for a long moment. The company had quietly acknowledged the trust ownership whenever it helped their accounting situation, then conveniently ignored it whenever it threatened executive control. I looked directly at Conrad. You called me replaceable in a company that has been reporting my grandmother's ownership to tax counsel for over a decade. His jaw tightened visibly. He did not answer. Because there was no good answer. The tax records were clear. The ownership was documented. The conversion had happened. They had simply hoped I would never find out about it, or never understand what it meant. They had hoped wrong. August Vale performed confusion beautifully. He leaned back slowly in his leather chair, rubbed his forehead and said, "This is honestly the first I'm hearing of any final approval clause in that trust." I almost believed him. Then Maribel calmly produced board materials from 2 years earlier. A legal memorandum clearly marked Whitlow Trust Rights, Financing Considerations. Recipient list, August Vale, Conrad Wexler, prior legal counsel. August's face went completely still. Everett asked directly whether he had actually read the memo. August said, "Executives receive many legal updates routinely." That was not an answer. The memo explicitly warned that any major refinancing action would require formal notice to the Whitlow Trust's successor and approval from the controlling interest holder. Conrad had known. August had known. They had simply planned to move fast enough that I would either not notice the problem or not understand my legal rights. I thought of Grandma Winifred carefully labeling every single receipt by month. She would have understood immediately. She would have saved that memo in triplicate. She had taught me to save everything. And I had learned. The memo sat on the table between us like evidence at a trial. Because that was exactly what it was. The refinancing documents did not mention me anywhere. Not once. The lender information packet stated that executive management had full authority to proceed. It stated that ownership consent was not applicable. It stated that no material governance approvals were currently outstanding. Every single sentence was demonstrably false. Conrad called it a minor drafting issue. Simone called it a significant disclosure problem. Everett asked who had signed off on the final packet. Conrad said his finance team had prepared it. I asked, which specific team member? He looked annoyed. Miles. I placed Miles Brennan's document version history on the table. Miles had edited the ownership disclosure page. Conrad had approved it. August had signed the final certification. The silence stretched uncomfortably. Then Everett said, "We will pause the refinancing process immediately." Conrad turned sharply. "That will seriously damage our lender relationship." I said, "So would lying to them about material governance rights." For the first time in 6 months, nobody in the room corrected my tone. Nobody told me I was overreacting. Nobody said I was being too careful. The evidence spoke for itself. I could feel the weight of what this meant. They had lied to the bank, in writing. Miles was called into the boardroom at exactly 3:37 p.m. He arrived with a notebook, a blue tie, and the confident posture of someone who had always been protected by more powerful people. Everett asked directly who told him to mark ownership consent as not applicable. Miles glanced quickly at Conrad. Conrad stared straight ahead. Miles said, "I was following the prior template format." Simone asked who gave him that template. Miles swallowed visibly. "Conrad." Conrad finally spoke. "I asked him to prepare standard materials." Maribel pulled up a message from Conrad to Miles on the screen. "Use the clean ownership version. No need to invite Whitlow complications into lender review." Whitlow complications, my grandmother's rights, my inheritance, my final say, complications. Miles looked like he might actually be sick. Conrad did not look sorry at all. He looked irritated that a private message had become public evidence. The board was watching both of them now, and neither one was performing well under scrutiny. I sat quietly and let the record speak. Sometimes silence is the most powerful tool available. The board members exchanged glances. This was not incompetence. This was theft. The evidence was mounting. Every question exposed another layer. Every answer made things worse. Miles's promotion packet was full of my actual work. Vendor savings analysis I had built from scratch. Overtime reserve model I had created and tested. Facilities penalty tracker I had designed. forecast correction summary I had written. He had changed the formatting and removed my initials carefully, but he had not changed enough. My formulas were still embedded there. My notes were still visible in hidden cells. One tab was literally named Page Draft in the file history. Everett asked Miles to explain the overtime reserve model. He gave a vague answer about labor flexibility management. I asked him what the yellow cells specifically meant. He stared at the screen. They're highlighted assumptions? No, I said. They're union contract thresholds. If you miss them, the entire reserve calculation is wrong. Miles looked at Conrad again. This time Conrad did not try to save him. The board saw it clearly now. Miles was not a rising finance leader. He was a man standing on stolen spreadsheets. And Conrad had known exactly what he was promoting. That made both of them complicit. The room was very quiet. I thought about all the late nights I had spent building those models, all the care I had put into each formula. Conrad's protection had limits, and Miles had just found them. The finance team had been silent for months. Fear is efficient that way. But once the board investigation officially opened, people started sending careful emails. One analyst, Tori Ames, wrote that Conrad regularly assigned women the detail work and men the presentation work. A payroll specialist, Brenna Tate, said her overtime warnings were dismissed as overly cautious until Miles repeated them word for word. A senior accountant, Orla Pierce, admitted she had stopped raising concerns entirely because Conrad called her catastrophic in meetings. I read their statements alone in a small side office, one after another, and felt my anger change shape. This was not only about my ownership. It was about every person who had been trained to believe that accuracy made them difficult. Everett asked if I wanted the employment review limited to my specific case. I said no. Replaceable was not just an insult directed at me, I said. It was his entire management style for years. The board nodded. They were finally seeing the pattern, and patterns, once seen, cannot be unseen. The silence had been broken, and once broken, it could not be restored. That was the power of truth. I thought about how many people had stayed silent, how many had been too scared to speak, until now. Conrad's personnel file had warnings going back 4 full years. Not formal discipline, warnings carefully disguised as coaching notes, communication concerns, perceived dismissiveness, high turnover among direct reports, repeated complaints regarding credit allocation, perceived. That word did a lot of hiding. A former finance manager had written clearly, Conrad creates an environment where staff feel actively punished for surfacing bad news. She resigned 3 months later. The company did nothing because Conrad consistently delivered clean board packets and tidy forecasts every quarter. Clean packets, tidy forecasts, the same polished reports now under review for missing risk disclosures. Everett looked exhausted. August said, Conrad has always produced strong results for us. I could not stop myself. So did the people he made, too afraid to correct him. The room went quiet. August's eyes flashed. That was when I knew the CEO was not simply negligent. He was invested in keeping Conrad useful. Because Conrad protected him too. The company had chosen convenience over accountability, profit over people, clean reports over honest ones, until the cost became too high to ignore. I watched August's face. He knew what the pattern revealed. He had chosen to ignore it, year after year, until it was too late. August invited me to his office after the meeting ended. Simone came with me. He did not like that. His office had skyline views, leather chairs, and a framed photo of the company's first headquarters building. Grandma's money had helped keep that first headquarters open, but her name was nowhere on the wall. August offered me a board observer role, a generous dividend adjustment, and a public acknowledgement of the trust. In exchange, I would approve the refinancing, waive claims over prior governance failures, and keep Conrad in place through the end of the quarter. Simone stayed silent. She wanted me to answer for myself. I looked at the written offer. It was more money than I had ever seen. Then I thought about Fern sliding me the exit packet with the ownership waiver, Miles standing beside my stolen work, Conrad's pen tapping the screen. You're replaceable. I pushed the offer back across the desk. No. August's polite mask slipped completely. His voice went cold. You're making a mistake. I stood up. No, I'm making a choice. I stood slowly. Simone gathered her papers. We left his office without looking back. Some offers are designed to silence you. Those are the ones you refuse. The independent audit began Monday morning. By Wednesday, the entire company felt different, not louder, tighter. People stopped joking near the finance department printer. Conrad kept his office door shut all day. Miles worked from home and sent emails with too many exclamation points. The auditor, Celeste Rowan, had absolutely no patience for charm or excuses. She requested raw vendor files, expense approvals, forecast versions, bonus calculations, lender drafts, and HR records connected to my exit. The first finding arrived fast. Vendor rebates had been recorded early to improve quarterly results artificially. Not imaginary money, real rebates. Wrong timing, deliberately chosen. Enough to make the refinancing metrics look significantly better. Conrad called it an accounting judgment call. Celeste asked for the written policy supporting that judgment. There was none. Then she found the second issue. Some client penalty reserves had been moved below the line labeled non-recurring. They were recurring, every single quarter. The pattern was clear. I watched it all unfold. Every hidden choice becoming visible. Every shortcut becoming evidence. Every lie becoming proof. The walls were closing in. Conrad could feel it. August could feel it. And there was nowhere left to hide. The numbers never lie, they just wait to be read. The vendor was Northlake Systems. They handled facilities scheduling software badly. Employees hated it. Clients complained about missed maintenance tickets. The contract cost more every single year. I had flagged Northlake twice in my reports. Conrad ignored me both times. Celeste found why. Conrad's wife owned a small consulting firm that had received referral fees from Northlake. Not illegal by itself if properly disclosed. It was not disclosed. August claimed he did not know. Then Celeste found a calendar invite from 6 months earlier. Northlake referral arrangement, discussion. Attendees: Conrad, August, Miles. The room changed. August rubbed his jaw slowly. Conrad said the arrangement had no financial impact on company decisions. Celeste placed my rejected vendor comparison on the screen. Northlake was 18% more expensive than the next qualified provider. That was significant impact. That was real money. That was employees being told budgets were tight, while private business relationships stayed comfortable. The board saw it, all of it. This was the moment everything changed. Not because of my ownership. Because the truth finally had witnesses. The board was silent. This was not a mistake. This was a pattern. Private gain at company expense. And everyone had known. Conrad looked smaller when he no longer controlled the room. Not weak exactly, just ordinary. That surprised me. For months his title had made him seem taller, sharper, untouchable. Without it, he was a man with expensive cufflinks and bad explanations. Everett announced Conrad was suspended from all financial approvals. Miles's promotion was canceled pending review. August objected to Conrad's suspension, saying continuity mattered. I opened the trust agreement. Major executive compensation and debt actions require my approval, I said. I do not approve Conrad retaining financial authority during this review. The room went completely still. Final say did not sound dramatic in a legal document. It sounded dramatic when actually used. August stared at me. You are not qualified to run finance. I said, I am qualified to stop someone under investigation from running it. No one argued. The vote passed. Conrad was suspended. Suspension felt like mercy, but it was really just the beginning. The investigation would continue, and more would be found. I watched him leave the boardroom. His steps were measured, his face was blank, but his hands shook slightly. Power, once lost, is hard to reclaim, especially when you never earned it. Especially when the records prove it. Celeste's final draft showed August's signature on more than just the refinancing packet. He had approved the bonus framework, he had approved Northlake renewal, he had approved the lender materials, he had received the old trust memo, he had ignored the staff warnings. Every time Conrad acted like a shield, August stood directly behind him. Everett called a closed board session. This time, I attended as controlling owner. August tried to frame everything as aggressive, but reasonable leadership. Then Celeste read a line from his email to Conrad. Close the financing before Whitlow Review slows us down. Whitlow Review. Me. Grandma. The ownership rights they hoped would stay inconvenient instead of powerful. August leaned back, color draining from his face. For the first time, I saw the whole structure clearly. Conrad had called me replaceable. August had treated my ownership like an obstacle to outrun. Both had miscalculated the same thing. Quiet did not mean gone. I had spent 6 months documenting, watching, waiting. Now the wait was over. The documentation spoke for itself. The paper trail was complete. Every decision, every signature, every ignored warning. August had built this system. Conrad had operated within it. Both had underestimated me. That was their mistake. The final board meeting started with the refinancing vote. I voted no, not forever. No until corrected numbers, full disclosures, vendor conflicts, and reserve policies were fixed. Then Conrad's employment, terminated for cause, undisclosed vendor conflict, misleading lender materials, retaliatory termination attempt, misappropriation of staff work, hostile management pattern. Then Miles, promotion canceled, retention award revoked, placed under performance review with independent supervision. Then August. Resignation accepted effective immediately after the board concluded he failed to disclose ownership rights, ignored legal warnings, and attempted to push financing around controlling approval. Nobody shouted. That was the most satisfying part. The men who had filled rooms with certainty lost power through minutes, motions, and signatures. Conrad did not look at me when he left. Good. I did not need his regret. I had his records, and records last longer than apologies. Justice through process. Accountability through documentation. Change through transparency. That was the model moving forward. No shortcuts, no exceptions. The votes were final, the decisions were made, the company would survive. But it would survive honestly, with transparent leadership, with protected employees, with my grandmother's legacy intact. That was worth more than their approval. People expected me to take over as CFO immediately. I did not. That would have been another version of arrogance. I owned final say, not every skill. Instead, I appointed an interim CFO from outside the old circle, required transparent reporting, and created a staff escalation channel that bypassed bonus-eligible executives. Vendor conflicts had to be disclosed. Forecast changes needed version notes. Promotion files had to identify who actually created the work. Finance meetings changed too. No more public humiliation as management theater. No more calling people difficult for protecting accuracy. Tori got credit for the labor model she built. Brenna's overtime warnings became part of board reporting. Orla led the clean clothes project Conrad once mocked as too cautious. One afternoon, Fern handed me a small envelope. Inside was the exit packet I had refused to sign, with the ownership waiver highlighted. "Thought you might want this," she said. I kept it. Not as anger. As a reminder of how close they came to making me sign myself invisible. The company was changing, not just in policy, in culture, in trust. People started speaking up in meetings, questions were welcomed, accuracy was valued. That was the real transformation. The new lobby plaque went up 6 months later. Winifred Whitlow, founding trust investor adder. Her capital preserved this company's future. I stood in front of it alone before the office opened. My grandmother would have hated the attention and secretly loved the accuracy. The company survived the paused refinancing. We redid it later, with honest numbers, better terms, and no hidden bonuses. Clients stayed because we told the truth before the truth became a crisis. Employees stayed because the room finally felt safer for bad news. I no longer worked as an analyst. I served as controlling owner and board chair, with professionals running what professionals should run. I stopped trying to prove I deserved respect from people committed to misunderstanding me. Conrad once said, "You're replaceable." He meant my chair, my paycheck, my badge. He never understood that worth is not the same as position. Positions can be taken by people with titles and pens and smug little smiles, but ownership of your voice, your records, your courage, and your name, that is final say, and mine was never his to revoke.